Today, I'm speaking with Rachel Glennerster. Rachel's an associate professor of economics at the University of Chicago and helped launch the University of Chicago's Market Shaping Accelerator, which aims to use insights from economics to solve market failures that lead to too little investment in innovation to solve problems important to society.
What is market shaping?
Market shaping is the idea of leveraging the power of markets to incentivize innovators to generate the innovations we need to solve some of the world's biggest problems. Now, markets have a lot of benefits. They, help incentivize innovation. They develop products that people actually want to use. They aggregate information. But they also get things wrong. They're not very good at solving things where there are externalities like climate change. So the idea is to get the best of both worlds and incentivize markets to respond to the things where we really need them to respond to.
Learning about this accelerator actually made me think of this blog post that a friend shared with me recently. So the blog post was by Jacob Trefethen, and it's called 10 Technologies That Won't Exist in 5 Years. So Jacob's the science policy grant maker at Open Philanthropy. And so he has kind of a sense of where science funding goes and how hard it is to make progress in some areas. And I found the blog post really moving and really tragic, and it feels relevant. So I wanted to share a couple of the technologies that he thinks won't exist. One relates to tuberculosis, which kills 1.5 million people a year, which is twice as many people as die of malaria each year. And according to Jacob, a tuberculosis vaccine that worked in adults is totally achievable. But he thinks for basically no good reasons, we won't have one in 5 years. Like nothing related to the science will prevent us from getting there. Similarly, strep A kills 500,000 people a year. And again, a vaccine is achievable. Hepatitis C kills 300,000 people a year. Again, a vaccine is achievable. And yeah, it's really horrible. I definitely had the kind of intuition that diseases like this, that are this deadly, we're not kind of creating the vaccines or treatments we need because the science is too hard. But when I learned that that's not the case, it just feels really unacceptable. Are these the kinds of market kind of failures that you're talking about? And if so, can you talk me through why they happen?
Yeah, those are exactly the kinds of targets we need to do market shaping for. Actually, tuberculosis was one of the diseases that brought me into thinking about this many years ago when I first started working on trying to accelerate vaccines. And, it took way too long for us to get a malaria vaccine compared to the huge death toll. Like, there's a number of market failures going on. There's a number of reasons people don't invest in doing innovations for these kinds of problems. And one of them is that there's a lot of pressure to keep prices down once you invent something, and especially if it's really important for poor people. So it's a time inconsistency problem, we call it.
Okay.
You would be willing to pay for something in advance, but once it comes, there's a big pressure to keep prices down. And the patent system that we have to cause, to incentivize people for innovation is really inefficient. Like, it works by allowing companies to keep prices high to get a reward and a return on their investment. But if you're designing something for really poor people, you can't keep, nobody's going to buy it when the price is high.
Right.
So you have a small quantity at a high price and you make your money back, and then later you reduce your price and get it to lots of people. So it doesn't work very well for diseases that affect a lot of you, or a vaccine where people are willing to pay a lot when you get a drug that you're about to die of a disease, but a vaccine, you need a low price to get to lots of people. And that's not how our patent system is designed to work. It works by charging a high price to a small number of people. And that's just really inefficient.
why some countries didn't have COVID vaccines sooner.
So that was our, march with saying, build factories, get this manufacturing scaled up. We have no idea if this vaccine is going to work. It doesn't matter. We had a very low percentage rate for the vaccines working. It was still worth putting billions of dollars into accelerating manufacturing. If I'm a firm, I'm not going to put billions of dollars into expanding manufacturing capacity until I know whether the vaccine works. Because I'm only going to get $4 on it. $6. 6 was the AstraZeneca, $6 to $40. 40 was the, Pfizer type. So it's not worth risking putting billions of dollars in building a manufacturing plant if the vaccine might not work. But that's exactly what the US and the UK did. They poured money into expanding factories and producing this stuff so that as soon as it was approved, they had vaccine ready to go. And that's why, that's why I'm going to get emotional. That's why my parents could get a vaccine in January 2022.
Wow.
January 2021. And other people couldn't. It's because of that investment. And if only we'd managed to persuade more people to do this, I think of the lives that could have been saved.
No, it makes sense. What do you think it would have looked like to really have nailed that from a funding perspective, to actually get things out as quickly as we could have?
So many things we could have done differently. So many things. So one of the things that we really wanted middle-income countries to do was to put money into expanding their capacity before we knew whether they were going to work. And multilateral development banks wouldn't lend to them until they knew whether the vaccine would work. The international mechanisms for buying the vaccines for low and middle income countries didn't buy them until they knew whether they worked. And we spent months arguing about how to fund these vaccines. Initially, people were arguing that no countries should pay for them. No low and middle income countries should pay for them. It should all be donor money. We're just not going to get enough donor grant money to get it out to enough people. And so they traded off waiting for donor money against and saying, nobody should ever have to borrow to fund vaccines. Well, that's crazy. If they'd been able to borrow and get more vaccines faster, they would have saved billions, trillions of dollars. And so it was an economic return that, Brazil and other places. But they thought, the rich countries are going to pay for it, so we'll just wait. Well, that was a really bad miscalculation, and holding out the prospect that rich countries were going to just pay for that when they were coping with their economies collapsing, it just wasn't realistic. I mean, even in the EU was arguing over exactly what price and trying to drive the price down. It made no sense. Get the money out there. It's worth, don't argue whether you're getting it for $40 or $45. It's worth $5,000. Don't nickel and the hours you spent negotiating. A lot of people are dying. It just didn't make any sense.
Designing incentives for pull mechanisms.
So coming up with the right amount of incentive is, I think, one of the toughest challenges in designing these pull mechanisms. And the way you tackle it is from the top down or the bottom up.
Okay.
So one thing you do is you say, how valuable is this to society? Right? So that's the maximum that you should be willing to pay. And of that, how much will the private public be willing to pay, and how much is the kind of externality, how much is the market failure? And so the subsidy needs to be linked to how much the market failure is. And then, so that's kind of the top down. What's the social value of this innovation?
Right. What should we be willing to pay?
What should we be willing to pay? Exactly. And then from the bottom up, you think about the costs, because you don't want to reward people the full social value if it costs them only 1/100th of that to come up with
Sure.
it. Like, you'd like to use that money to stimulate some other innovation. So then you look at the costs, what you think are the costs, and, how much do we think it would cost to innovate, or how big a incentive does the private sector normally need to come up with this kind of innovation? So we can use that a lot in drugs and vaccines. Like, how big a market stimulates the pharmaceutical industry to come up with these kind of breakthroughs? And we look at the chance of failure. How often do companies put a lot of money in and then fail? And there's normally a huge gap between those, like the costs. At one level, the social benefit is way, way, way higher. You don't want to put the incentive exactly where the minimum cost is, because you might have got it wrong.
Sure.
And you might end up with no vaccine or no climate solution. And that's really damaging to the world if you put the price too low.
Right.
So you probably want to put it a bit above that, but like exactly how much above it? So again, you can start getting empirical about that. You can say, well, what's the chance that we underestimated, and what would be the social loss if we underestimated? It's basically a lot of kind of simulations of different scenarios, and then a certain amount of judgment and an assessment of what we think donors are willing to pay for, and, what's realistic. And so it's a really interesting mix of quite a lot of technical number crunching. Mm-hmm. And on the benefits side and on the cost side, and some political judgment and sort of understanding, in a sense, the political market of who might be willing to pay for this. And it brings together all the things I love about my work, which is, some interesting economics and some tough number crunching and some political judgment.
Right. Oh, that's great. Because I was just thinking, wow, that sounds really hard. I don't know who's going to design these, but it sounds like you and your colleagues are excited to design them. It does sound really difficult to get these right. The kind of idea sounds really compelling. And then as soon as you start talking about, how difficult it is to even just pick a number, which in my head, I hadn't even considered that. So it really kind of, makes more salient to me what a different challenge this is to push funding, where you're just kind of evaluating grant applications where someone said what their budget is.
Right. But the social, we might be giving up huge benefits to the world if we don't do this. So yeah, it's hard, but the reward is like incredible if we get this right.
Using pull mechanisms to get a universal COVID vaccine.
So you make those assumptions, and then you run these Monte Carlo simulations with the probabilities of things hitting. And then you look at the deaths that would happen if there was a bad wave hit and we were late in getting a vaccine out that helped. And that's how you come up with the calculations. And I should say that those numbers I gave you are just for the US. So $1.5 to $2.6 trillion benefit for the US.
Wow. That's really mind-blowing.
I mean, I think this is the thing, like, we lose so much money from curbing the economy when these pandemics hit, when even kind of moderate things hit, when people die from waves, which they are still doing. And we just putting numbers on these things is really important. I think probably one of the most important things I've done in my life is just put numbers on the value of vaccines during COVID to just like make it real and understandable, like how much it is worth investing in these things.
That makes sense and does seem like an incredibly good buy. I guess we haven't yet talked about how much CMC would cost, but I'm guessing it is not on the order of trillions of dollars. How much would it cost?
Yeah. So we know how much benefit there is to the world of getting this. And then we say it would be worth, therefore, the US doing an advanced market commitment to cover everyone in the US who wanted to receive it, i.e. roughly half the US population. And so that's 165 million people. And so the AMC would require something like 6.4 billion.
Okay.
So that's not exactly we think it would be reasonable to spend 6.4 billion on an AMC. That would be an incredible deal versus 1.5 trillion in losses or 1.5 trillion in benefits from having it. I don't know exactly what it's going to cost a firm to produce this, but, we talked before about how do you set the price?
The top-down approach. And
the top-down, the bottom-up approach. And our, estimate is we should be willing to pay 6.4 billion in order to get the benefit of, at least 1.4 trillion benefit.
I guess why use an advanced market commitment in this case rather than just funding groups doing promising work? Because you've already said kind of there are firms working on a universal COVID-19 vaccine. If we know anything about which firms seem to be doing the most promising work, should we just give them money to do that?
So what there are research groups working on this. What we need is big firms coming in and thinking that it's going to be profitable to work on this. Because it's one thing having research groups coming in, but you need a kind of market, a significant market out there for, the big guys to come in who know how to run trials, who put the work into kind of making these things effective at scale. And that's what we're missing at the moment. Remember, the main issue is anyone working on it? And there may be some firms who are working on it, but there's not sufficient attention to it given the benefits. And the more work you put on it, the faster it will come and the more likely it is to come. And so you don't have to have this hard cutoff of it wouldn't happen without this. Is there a probability that will increase the chance of it happening? And what's the probability that it will speed it up? And I think we can be pretty confident it would speed it up and increase the probability of it being actually produced. And we see this too often that, research groups will be able to take things to a certain point, but you need the really big guys in there to kind of pull it into, effective at scale, gone through clinical trials, etc. And they will come in earlier and they will push it harder if there's a bigger market for it. Of that, I'm pretty confident.
Pull mechanisms to incentivize repurposing of generic drugs.
There are a lot of drugs which are approved for one purpose, one disease, and end up actually being quite effective for another disease. And we actually saw this during COVID. There was a fantastic trial in the UK where they just kind of tried a lot of existing low-cost off-patent drugs and to see whether they worked. And a bunch of, some of them did. So the problem is firms don't have the incentive to spend millions of dollars testing a drug that's already off patent to see if it works on another disease.
And so just to make sure I understand, is this kind of like the fact that people take aspirin for various specific reasons, but it also seems to reduce some types of heart disease? And so there are just like things like that at other places, and we learn about them, but we don't really because generic drugs aren't, it's not that profitable to sell them.
Yeah, so it's exactly that. And it's profitable to sell them if you're not doing any R&D. But if you do a big clinical trial,
right,
you're not going to get the returns to that because all your competitors can sell it for the other disease too. And
right.
So you can't make any money from it.
Yeah. Well, this almost sounds like related to the case where you are going to use push funding because as soon as we know that a generic drug is helpful for some other disease, other firms can sell it for that other disease. Why is it that pull mechanisms apply here?
So the key thing that we want to generate with the pull mechanism is firms to think about all the millions of drugs out there. Like if you're sitting in the center, you can't really tell what possible drugs are there that could be repurposed for what possible disease. So what you want to just say is we'll pay, a higher price for anything that you come up with that is cost effective, right? So that is decentralizing the search process. So I'm not in the center saying, I think this drug could be repurposed for that. No, I'm just saying, anyone out there who has a really good idea for a particular drug could be repurposed for something else. We want to give an incentive for all of that. So a key thing about pull is that it harnesses the information of all, millions of people out there who might have ideas that you don't know anything about. And so that's why we need pull here, because there's millions of drugs, there's millions of different uses. We don't know what they are. We need to create an incentive for people to come forward with ideas. So I think there's two different ways that you could do a pull mechanism for repurposing drugs, and they solve different problems. One is in high-income countries and one is in low-income countries. So in high-income countries, you can tie the reward to whether people use the new repurposed drug for its new purpose. So you can say, if you test and find that an existing drug works for a new disease and people use it for that new disease, we'll pay you based on how many people use it for the new disease. And that works in high-income countries. Right, in the UK, there's the pharmaceutical price regulation system, which sets prices for all drugs. And so you can say, this is the price that we're going to repay you if you use the drug for this purpose. And it's all tracked, and we know why doctors are using it. We know, so we can tell whether a doctor's using it for the new purpose or the old purpose.
Right.
Right? In a low-income context, we don't have those kind of centralized data systems to know whether someone is using that drug for the old reason or the new reason.
Right.
But there's a lot of things where probably repurposed drugs might really help in low-income countries. So then I think the best thing to do is a prize where you just pay someone, but you pay someone if it works, right? You tie it to an outcome. So you say, we will give you money if you manage to show that this generic drug that's super cheap actually works for some other reason, and you get regulatory approval for it, and then you get a prize for having done all of that work.
Specific interventions versus systemic reform in education.
So it seems plausible that focusing on specific interventions is meaningfully worse than encouraging governments to make systemic reforms to their education systems. Is that something that you worry about?
So it's certainly the case that there are big picture systemic issues that cause problems in education. Like, it's a big deal. Mm-hmm. So we were talking about the benefits of teaching at the right level and the fact that curricula are sometimes very overly ambitious. And that's a problem. And it'd be great if people fix that problem. And there's a lot of RCT evidence that basically individual programs that kind of help you get round that fact, like teaching at the right level, are really beneficial. And you might think, well, the right thing to do is, well, let's go fix the underlying problem.
Right.
And I'm all for that, but it's hard. And there's all sorts of political economy reasons why things are designed for the top of the class. And so if you can do that, great. If you can get an education system to respond to the needs of low-income children, that's more flexible, that's evidence-based, like, great on you. But I'm not going to wait for that to do the other things. Because let's be clear, every single thing that we're recommending here has been tested in isolation and worked in isolation. So it is not the case, like it's empirically not the case that you need systems reform to do these things. Like they have been tested and they have proved to work when they were the only thing that was done. Because a lot of these come from RCTs, not all of them, but a lot of them do. And RCTs are exactly, that's what they do. They just move one thing. They don't move everything else. So systems change is important. Having systems that actually care about, low-income kids is really important. But you can't just magic that. You can't put in that as a recommendation. Care about low-income kids. Right. And there's a political economy of that. It is true that there's probably some benefits of doing a bunch of things. There may be benefits of doing some things together. Mm-hmm. If you had better like the structured pedagogy is an example of that. They actually tie together a whole bunch of things that move together. But you don't wait till you have the perfect. Get on with doing the things that you can do.